Sponge filters are pretty common in the aquarium hobby nowadays, but there is a different version of a sponge. The Matten filter. And I'm here to tell you why it's not all it's cracked up to be. Hello everyone, this is Bentley. We're back in the filter series and we're going to finally address the Matten filter. If you're a shrimp keeper, just shut the video off. Just walk away. It's okay. I understand. Or you can stay here and rage comment later. That's fine. Alright, we're going to talk why the Matten filter isn't necessarily as amazing as it often gets popped up to be. Here's the thing, right? The simplest part, right? This is basically just a giant wall of sponge with a jet lift tube that comes out of here. Some Matten filters will have it go over the top. Some have a hole bored through them. This is probably my preferred version. But here's the thing. There are a couple of negatives when comparing to something like the standard sponge filter or a number of other air-driven filtration methodologies like under gravel or box filters. Here's the thing, right? With a Matten filter, the goal of this is to put it on the side of your aquarium. This one in particular is for a 20-gallon long, so what you would do is you have the long side of the tank, you'd pick either side, and you wedge this thing in. Pretty simple, right? Wall of sponge, you put it in one side of your tank, you're going to have a void on this side, your air line's going to come in through that little hole right there. You're going to get airflow just like you would with any standard sponge filter, and the only difference is you have a little jet lifter to help provide linear flow across the surface of the water. And then that will go across your tank, blah, blah, blah. Simple. Still, though, we're talking a sponge. Now, the big difference is, in the case of, it's like brand new, it's got corgi fur on it. This is what happens. When you have corgis, it gets everywhere. Oh, Lord, I just literally see it all over the place. All right. Now, in the difference between this and a sponge filter, you can kind of see if I bring it up close. You can see this is relatively fine sponge mesh. You're not going to have a coarser sponge filter. And there is a lot of reason why you would do that. I would consider that mostly positive, so we're not going to talk about that here. But the big benefit, quotation marks, is that as particulates get jammed in through the lower parts, the water level can slowly sip through, and you just have this huge surface area to create beneficial bacteria, collect detritus, etc. There are some faults, though. So in this exact design like this, right, you're going to plug it into a tank. But if you want substrate, shrimp keepers usually want some substrate, and a lot of shrimp keepers, Matten filters are their go-to. You now have this line of substrate that sits here. So when you do need to maintenance this thing, which you do need to maintain it, you do need to clean it every once in a while, when you move that, now there's no barricade holding your substrate in place. It gets back into your kind of void chamber on this side, starts causing a little bit of havoc because trying to get that organized and back in place can be a pain. Now there are kits that come with glass baffles that are going to hold it on the sides and the bottom. But now you need to have your tank completely empty, silicone the baffles in place, and there are a number of people who aren't very DIY savvy, who just, that's not going to be very appealing to them. That's where a standard sponge filter is just going to be significantly better than the Matten filter. The second thing with the Matten filter, usually, because you are using a larger tube, right, you need a bit higher amounts of airflow to move the amount of water, because you are coming all the way up top to the surface, right? We're bringing our water in down here toward the bottom, all the way up and over. So, if you don't have a significantly powerful enough air pump, you could get non-optimal flow. And similarly, because you do want that slightly higher flow rate, this is not necessarily a good option for fry tanks, which is where a lot of sponge filters can really be amazing for certain fish keepers, if those fry are particularly susceptible to high flow. An example would be my favorite, rainbow fish. They're extremely fragile for the first month of their life, and they sit in the top inch of water, almost all of them. There are some rare exceptions, but now you're sitting right on the cardinal flow from this, and honestly, they can literally just die in that kind of flow because they are very weak for their first, especially 2 weeks, but upwards of about a month. And then they get a little more solid, and they'll venture in different parts. If you have similar fish or very delicate fry, that can be a problem with this particular filter. Whereas you would look at something like the standard sponge filter, a box filter, or maybe under gravel filtration, where you can dial that airflow down, maybe have your tubes a lot shorter, right? Kind of the similar style that you would do for an anoxic setup, but you don't necessarily have to try to create an anoxic environment in order to make it an effective filtration method. That can be a downside. Now, are we really picking at straws at this point? Yeah, honestly, because about the only other, quote, downside is that this style of Matten filter, the one that takes up an entire side, creates a nice cavity over here, and there's lots of pros to that cavity. Once you get past about a 20 long, maybe a 40-gallon breeder, they do make them for 40-gallon breeders, but even then you're talking a really big piece of sponge, and these are quite a bit more expensive than a standard sponge filter. They don't fit in big tanks. They're not designed for larger tanks. Even the 40-gallon breeder is kind of a stretch. You are better off with the designs that are designed to have the glass baffles in place, or the corner variety. They make corner Matten filters where you're going to see this, designed to bend something like this, and you need baffles for the corner Matten filters to hold them in place. Again, if you don't like that DIY kind of stuff, you don't want to work on the tank, maybe you're really not good at silicone work, you've struggled to reseal tanks, whatever that may be, that all of a sudden is a massive negative in the ability to use one of these style of filters, because you need to do the baffles in place to hold this thing in place for a corner Matten filter. So an example would be if you wanted a 75-gallon tank to be air-driven, you would have to have baffles in order to do corner Matten filters for a 75-gallon reliably if you're doing air-driven Matten filtration. Not the case with under gravel filtration, with sponge filters, with box filters. Those can all scale up relatively easy regardless of the tank size. Whereas, honestly, Matten filters perform best in some of your smaller tanks as far as simplicity of installation is concerned. Now, if you are good at DIY, you don't have any issue siliconing glass in place and putting those baffles in, then, okay, nullifies that point. And again, this is why I'm saying, for the negatives and why the Matten filter is not as great, is a little reaching. I will fully admit that. But I think it's important to think about these things because they are relevant to the conversation. Now, the final thing I will say is when service schedules for these, depending on how you set your tank up, because you are blocking off this entire side of your tank, when you remove this to service it, unlike a sponge filter which you can just plonk back in place, you do need a cavity over here. So you run the risk of getting fish or shrimp or whatever in that area where you want this to be. Can you eventually fish them out? Yes, but usually you want this cavity on this side to be kind of small. So that might be very difficult to actually go in with a net and catch anything. So there is some potential just pains to deal with when you're trying to use a Matten filter, especially in the case of like breeders or as a more efficient option to standard sponges or some of the other air-driven filtration out there, or you just like the concept of this like huge amount of surface area that's all air-driven with the jet lifter that causes linear flow instead of vertical flow, right? All of the other sponge filters primarily are using vertical flow. Yes, there are options out there to put the jet lifter style tube on them, I know, but primarily we're looking at that vertical flow so we don't get that kind of linear movement of water. That's it. That's all the negatives when we're talking about the Matten filter. And like I said, kind of reaching a little bit, yes, but they are some important negatives of why something like a box filter, an under gravel filter, or this standard sponge can be a significantly better filtration option if you want an air-powered filter for yourself in your aquarium. It's just some food for thought. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Leave a comment down below. Have you used a Matten filter? Have you been looking at a Matten filter? Maybe you have a specific tank in mind. Maybe you want to do it for shrimp, or you were really thinking about, oh, this would be great for my fry tank, or it's great for some kind of foraging type fish that can go up this thing and forage out of it. Maybe like corridors or something like that has really got you in the mood and you were thinking about this is the proper filtration for me. I want to hear in the comments down below. Let me know. What are your thoughts on the Matten filter? Did I forget something? Am I completely wrong? Matten filter is the greatest, most impressive thing you've ever seen in your life. You'll let me know in the comments down below. Shrimp keepers, you'll probably rip me apart. I'm ready for it. hit me up in the comments. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.